As a renowned Islamic scholar, transformational speaker, teacher, and mentor, Abdul Fattah Adeyemi has inspired countless lives with his insightful lectures and compassionate guidance. Connect with a community of like-minded individuals seeking knowledge and achieving greatness.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. My name is Abdul Fattah Adeyemi. I thank you for joining me again for another experience on editing your universe. Today's topic is a reflection on the fire of desire. This topic falls within the study of Fiqhul-Ghara'iz. Fiqhul-Ghara'iz is not a formal field with its own schools, but rather a philosophical and legal approach found within traditional Islamic fiqh, that's Islamic jurisprudence. You also find it in psychology, that's nafsiyya. It also has to do with ethics, that's akhlaq, particularly in the topics of marriage, sexuality, sexual desires, modesty, and gender relations. Fiqhul Ghara'iz refers to the Islamic jurisprudential understanding of natural human instincts, especially those related to sexual desires, emotional needs, and physical urges. The word ghariza in Arabic denotes a deep, innate and instinctive drive. Something embedded in the human nature, that's in human fitrah by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fitrah is where the word iftar comes from. Iftar, the term we use when we break our fast. So when we break our fast by eating and drinking, and having the permission to have intimacy with our spouses. That is iftar. So the need and desire to eat and drink after hunger and thirst, and to be free to have intimacy after abstinence, are all human nature that cannot be denied and cannot be dismissed. Hence, we celebrate the mastery of the control of this desire. At the end of Ramadan, for instance, we call it Eid al-Fitr. Eid al-Fitr. That is the celebration of human nature. The celebration of the triumph over the engulfing energy of desire. The desire to eat, to drink, to have intimacy, many other things like that. We were able to control this desire. And so these desires are part of the human fitrah, human nature. And then we gain triumph over it. And then we do what we call iftar. Iftar is when we now say, okay, after we have been able to curb our fitrah, we now celebrate the iftar. That is by, putting a halt to that strict adherence to the discipline and the control of our desires, natural desires as human beings. Now let's talk about desire. We've been mentioning desire. What is this desire? That desire is that overwhelming urge of compulsive impulse, that powerful flame that is capable of warming a home or burning it down. Desire is the taciturn grammar of the soul. It is the unspoken syntax that structures our every action, from the most mundane to the most sublime. It is the fundamental ache of incompletion, the compass needle that quivers toward a distant north of fulfillment. It goes up that way. To be alive is to desire, is the proof of our lack, the evidence of our potential. It is, as the thinkers have long noted, It is the very ground of being, and yet it's also the source of all our suffering. From the philosophical vantage, desire is the great paradox. For some sages, wise people, it is a marvelous madness. It's a ladder whose steps from the physical to the intellectual could ultimately elevate the soul to the form of the beautiful and the good. That is to say, that desire is what pulls us from the cave of ignorance toward the light of truth. Yet, some other thinkers see the same force not as a ladder, but as a chain. They say that thirst, craving, and desire are the roots of suffering. The suffering that prevents the ignorant ones from being enlightened. As far as they are concerned, desire kills your light, and without light, you can't be enlightened. So you suffer in darkness because you don't have any light in you. That is, to extinguish suffering, according to them, you must not fulfill desire, but rather you should extinguish desire itself. Here, in this stark contrast, lies desire's duality. It is both the engine of transcendence and the anchor of bondage. However, the lens of some psychologists manifests and magnifies this internal conflict in some other ways. For example, they place desire, that is the libido, that's the primal scream for gratification, they place it at the dark hurt of the human psyche. They see it as a chaotic force that must be tamed or refined by the ego and superego, that's the conscience, often at great cost to our peace. You can't really be at peace while struggling to put your desire in check. For some others, scholars and thinkers and the like, they see desire as the fuel for individuation. They see it as the drive to become whole, to integrate our conscious selves with the desires of the unconscious shadow. In the modern clinic, however, desire manifests as compulsive impulse. A neural pathway worn so deep it becomes a prison. The dopamine rush of the pursuit becomes more potent than the attainment itself, trapping us in a cycle of craving that can indeed burn the house down for the warmth of a single flame that is fleeting. Looking at the children of Adam, Abel and Cain, Habila and Kabila, it is the desire for what someone else has that led to the first murder. For the rest of humanity, desire is the bedrock of civilization and the cause of its ruin. It is the desire for security that built the first walls. It is the desire for knowledge that launched ships into the unknown. It is the desire to impress others that inspire performativity and hypocritical expressions that make people to shapeshift for the fleeting admiration. It is the longing for another person that builds families and forges the deepest bonds of love. Yet, when it is untempered, when it is unchecked, this very same force is the desire for land that justifies conquest. It is the desire for resources that lays waste to ecosystem. It is this same desire for power that corrupts absolutely. Our most magnificent places of worship and our most brutal battlefields are born from the same source. And what is that? A human heart that wants and wants and wants. And in the natural world, we see desire stripped of all pretense. we see it reduced to its pure immoral essence. It is the raw programming imperative of life to continue itself. The vine desires the sun and strangles the tree to reach the sun. The bee is driven by desire for nectar, and in satisfying this desire, it pollinates the world. The predator desires the prey, and the chase begins. A struggle between life and death as old as time. A case in point is the spider advancing to eat up the insect that got caught up in its web. The spider desires to eat. The insect desires to escape death. There's no good or evil here, only the relentless, beautiful, and terrible engine of survival and propagation. When desires clash, only Allah can judge, only Allah can sort it out. It's a desire without narrative, without regret, a force of pure physics and biology. And that's what we see in the case of the spider that has spun a web and the fly gets caught in it. One desires to eat, the other one desires to survive. Which is which? There's none of them that is good or bad. It is just desire being what it is. Only Allah can sort it out and decide which of them should have their desires fulfilled. In this, we see our own desires reflected not as a sign of sins or as a sign of virtue, but as an ancient inherited current flowing through our blood with the same urgency that turns the flowers toward the rising sun. So what are we to make of this flame, this fire of desire? Perhaps the wisdom lies not in choosing between the embrace of desire or its annihilation, but in learning its nature, to pick it up with conscious hands, to understand that the same flame that can illuminate a room, that can cook a meal, and that can forge a tool, can also become a wildfire. A wildfire that can destroy anything on its path. The value is not in the flame itself, but in the wisdom of the one who tends it. To live without desire is to cease to be human, but to be ruled by desire is to remain only and merely an animal. You see, an animal can be praised in the way it unleashes its desires, but it's a dishonor for a human to unbridle his desires. The human journey, therefore, is the art of discernment, to learn which desires expand the spirit, connect us to others, and create beauty, and which desires contract us into hollow, hungry shells, consuming everything around us, including finally ourselves. It is the journey from being possessed by desire to becoming the conscious curator of desire, to warm our home with its gentle glow, and to never, never, ever play with it near the curtains. Apart from desire, there's this other one that's almost like a synonym to desire: lust. Aha! Lust is a kind of hunger. It's a sort of longing, a yearning to covet what is not yours, the craving for the unreachable. Lust is a gravity of the soul. It's not a mere flicker of want, but a fundamental force pulling the human heart towards the orbit of another. It is the bane of human carnality from the insatiable hollow flesh. It lives in the basement of our being, in the ancient architecture of the body, a relic wired for propagation before it was ever touched by the complexities of conscience. It is the raw, untranslated data of desire before it is filtered through the lens of love, respect, or even mere kindness. To speak of lust is to speak of a hunger that is both magnificent in its purity and terrifying in its pungency. It seeks not the person, but the sensation of the person. It is the scent of skin before a name is remembered, the map of gaze and the traces, not a history, but a topography of potential pleasure. It reduces the magnificent mosque of a human spirit into a single burning prayer mat of the flesh. It is the ultimate reduction, and in that reduction lies the power and its intense emptiness. It is apt to lust when Allah says in Quran chapter 95 verses 4 to 5, Allah says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Indeed, we have created human being in the best of all forms. When he is able to control his lust and desire, then he is reduced to the lowest of the low, lower than the animal. When he is governed by his lust and desire, when he is no longer able to control his lust for things. Lust is the ghost of the machine of many things we refer to as love. It is the impostor that wears the mask of affection. As for love, it builds. It seeks to know the weather of another's soul, their fears in the dead of night, the scars that shaped them. But lust merely projects. It projects its own fantasies upon the blank screen of the other, and then becomes a masterpiece of its own making. You see, this is why it shatters so easily upon the hard edges of real, complicated human beings. Yet, to condemn it utterly is to deny the very engine of life. It is the primal fire around which our ancestors huddled and cuddled. It is the insistent pulse that ensures continuity of humanity. It is a color on the spectrum of human connection, one that can add depth and heat to the more mature palette of love. But when lust is isolated, when it's amplified and pursued as an end in itself, it becomes an addiction to the surface of things. It is the thirst that is never quenched because it drinks from a vessel that cannot hold water. The human condition is to be a perpetual battlefield for this war between the animal and the angelic. Lust is the animal. It is magnificent in its strength, yet it is simple in its needs. On higher consciousness, it is the angel. It seeks meaning, permanence, and a union that goes beyond the carnal. The tragedy, therefore, is not in feeling lust or desire, because it's an undeniable current in the blood. The tragedy, however, is to mistake its powerful, shallow tide for deep, abiding ocean of connection. It is to be forever chasing the spark of ignition while never building a fireplace to keep warm. It promises everything, and it offers only a fleeting echo of a touch. It only leads to a loneliness that is disguised as the ultimate intimacy. Lust is the deception that says this will fill you, when its true nature is that of a bottomless cup. Tell me, who can ever have enough of lust? Nobody. And this brings us to a closer look at the engine room of both desire and lust. That's the heart. Then we talk about the two inclinations, the Nafs and the Fitrah. At the heart of the matter lies the concept of the Nafs, the self or the soul. And the Quran describes the Nafs in several states. But its most fundamental, the most foundational state is an-nafsul ammara to bisuh. That is the soul that incessantly commands to evil. That is the seat of raw, untamed desire, the compulsive impulse towards gratification, towards possessiveness, and towards arrogance. It is the lower self, the inner Fir'aun, that must be resisted and disciplined. However, this is only one side of the human coin. Parallel to the Nafs is the Fitrah that we described earlier on, that primordial innate disposition with which every child is born. The Fitrah is naturally inclined towards Tawheed, the oneness of Allah, towards recognizing truth, towards recognizing beauty and goodness. It is the source of our deepest, purest desire, the desire for meaning, for connection with Allah, and for love, and for the eternal peace. So, therefore, the human being becomes a battlefield, or perhaps a crucible, a melting pot, where the base desires of the nerves contend with the transcendent yearning of the Fitrah. The goal of a Muslim's life is to subjugate the nafs through struggle, that's jihadul nafs, and to purify it so that it may ascend to its higher state, nafsul lawama, the self-reproaching soul that feels guilt, and then ultimately move on to nafsul mutma'inna, the nafs, the soul that's at perfect peace and that is content with its Lord. And when we understand this very well, we know that lust and desire are not evils on their own, but they are for us to discipline, to control, to take charge of them. This is the bane of the human struggle, the struggle to control your desires, the struggle to harness your lust. And if you can do this, then you are truly a strong human being that you are, that possesses both the angelic nature and the pull towards the desire that is unbridled. And I pray that we shall all do our best to put our lusts and desires under check. It's not haram to be lustful. It's not haram to be desirous. But what is haram is for you not to control them and allow them to control you. This is where we draw the curtain on today's topic, a reflection on the fire of desire. First, we look at the meaning and the implications of fiqh al-gharaiz, which is the jurisprudence, the psychology and ethics of desire, lust and the control of the nafs. I do hope that you have had a wonderful experience with the discussion so far. There's a lot more ahead for us to look at together, inshallah. This is just like the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to look into. So join me again for the next one, inshallah. I am Abdul Fattah Adeyemi. Let us edit your universe together next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Acquire Abdul Fattah Adeyemi's soul-lifting handmade masterpieces and experience the divine beauty of Islamic artistry. Book counseling and therapy sessions to access a safe space to heal and thrive. Join the community. Transform your life. Edit your universe.